Welcome to episode 89 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's nerdiest film and digital photography podcast. My name is Mike Eckman, and it has already been 2 weeks since our last episode. Tonight, we are tackling the taboo topic of repairing your own cameras. While all of us at the show strongly support the talented men and women who have learned the craft of camera repair, we also understand that not everyone can afford to CLA every single camera. Sometimes there's a low-value folding camera or a Japanese 2.8 rangefinder that you want to put just one roll through before it goes back on the shelf. If opening cameras isn't something you're interested in doing, we'll give our best tips on how to keep your cameras running in good condition. Starting us off, from Saskatchewan, Canada, is a man of many Olympuses. Wait a minute, is it Olympuses or Olympii?
I just cheat and I say Olympus cameras, and that solves the problem.
From Yellow Springs, Ohio, loading his car up for the Cincinnati Camera Show in 2 weeks is Paul Reibel. Hey, Paul, how many Nikon rangefinders are you bringing this time?
You know, I haven't quite figured that out yet, but I have a bucket full, so there'll be several.
And last but not least, returning from his world travels to faraway lands is traveling Theo Panagopoulos. Hey, Theo, did you have any trouble getting your film through airport security?
None at all, actually. Everybody was very accommodating, hand-checked all the way, and in fact, one security person said, just tell me it's film and I'll hand-check it. You don't have to explain it to me.
Okay, I think that's enough introductions. I can see the waiting room is filling up. Let's click some buttons and let them in. All right, we have a loaded house here. We have a bunch of returning callers. Some returning callers we haven't seen in quite a while. Larry Effler. Larry, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
From Germany, John and Michael Mendizza. Hey, John, how you doing?
Hey there, nice to see you.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, we have a lot of regulars. Will Pinkham's back. Wayne Scheipers. Ray's here. Miles Liebeck is here. Alyssa Micha, you've been on the show a couple episodes ago. Welcome back. Pat Casey. Christopher Wells is back. Keir Frei, I think you've been on once before, right?
Yeah, that's right. I made it. Last time I was off work sick, so it's about the only time
That's
I
right.
get in is when I'm not working.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming back. The Zoom waiting room keeps rearranging, so it's hard to make. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody. Oh, there's one more person. All right, I think
It's
I got
probably
it.
worth mentioning that Ray Nason's here, and his background is Ronsonol lighter fluid, which I think he's just taking the mickey out of everybody by putting that as a background.
I mean,
So-
WD-40 would be the real.
WD-40, yeah.
That's the.
WD-40 will
absolute-
get you banned.
Yeah, that's a tip not to use. Well, real quick, just to get this out of the way, because we know it's going to come up. As a reminder, Saturday, March 22nd, Westchester, Ohio, the Cincinnati Camera Show, Paul, Anthony, and I will be there. A few other guests are supposedly going to make an appearance there too. But I have a beef to pick with Paul really quick, though, because I saw a preliminary list of cameras he's going to bring to sell. And it's the one camera that every time he gets one, he sells it and then he regrets it and has to buy another one. He's stuck in a vicious circle. And Paul, why are you selling your G617?
Because I've had it for 2 months and I haven't shot a roll of film in it. And
But you put a strap on it.
I'm so embarrassed. Have you ever put a strap on one of those cameras? It's the worst thing in the world to put a strap on. It fits on the roll cage rather than on the body itself. It's a mess. I really don't want to sell it, so maybe I'll just take it and put a crazy number on it and see if anyone.
You can always just give it to me, Paul.
That's an idea.
No, Paul, tell him if he comes, he can have it.
You can still probably buy one cheaper in Australia.
Yeah, probably. Well, anyway, so hope to see some of you guys there. I'll be there. I won't be selling nearly as much as what Paul has. I got a bunch of cool books I'm going to be bringing, and just a bunch of real cheap discount stuff too. But more importantly, I want to see as many of you guys as possible. And if we could arrange it, there's a really good Irish pub across the street from the hotel. Afterwards, we'll go grab some lunch and maybe a couple beers or something. So,
Mike, Andrew Reynolds is here. Did we catch him?
I don't think so. I mentioned his name, Andrew Reynolds, and then somebody named Valter. VALTR.
Walter is on the Discord server. Walter is
okay.
Canadian also, I believe.
Man, it's a northern invasion. No, it's okay.
Andrew, where are you calling from, Andrew?
I live in southern New Brunswick, Canada. I'm about an hour and a quarter from the border with Maine.
Wow,
Okay.
We're really getting the Canadians tonight. This is good.
We had this idea to talk about some camera repairs. It's a topic that comes up from time to time. Unfortunately, there are some people on the Discord server who are very good at repairing cameras, and none of them were available. So we're just going to kind of wing it here. I think we got to start with the disclaimer. If you want your camera to last and you want it done right, pay someone to do it. There's still so many talented people who know how to do this stuff. We've talked about repairs before on the show many times, and with few exception, almost everything out there can still be repaired mostly. But we are on that imminent collapse of some of the more obscure models, your robots, your Tessinas, your Alpa SLRs that are officially going to get to that point where no one's willing to touch them. I was contacted by a gentleman through my site who was really needed to get a contacts repaired. And I just told him, unfortunately, there's really nobody in the United States that I trust to do contacts rangefinders anymore. And I cautioned him. I said, even if you do find a local guy who says, "Oh yeah, I could do it," really, I would question that. I'm not going to say don't believe somebody, but if just a general local camera shop says that they could CLA contacts, but they're not known for it, I would definitely want to know a little bit more about what they're able to do, because they're not easy to work on. There's a reason why most people won't touch them. But I had recommend he work with Oleg in Slovakia, Oleg Kalyevin, who sells on eBay a lot of cool stuff too. Okay, cameras, but obviously the issue of, if you're in the United States or even Canada, shipping something back and forth to Slovakia can be prohibitive, and even if you're willing to pay the money, there's risks that can be involved. But he did end up ordering something from Europe, shipped directly to Oleg, and then when Oleg was done, would ship it to him, so it only had to go over the ocean once. And it was a very positive experience. So he said everything came back really quickly. Oleg does great work. He's pretty fast. He does specialize in Soviet cameras mostly, but he does do the contacts rangefinders as well too. So there's still people out there, a lot of times you're going to have to wait. Not everybody can do things super quickly. Obviously, the more well-known and easier to repair cameras, like your Barnack Leicas, are usually pretty easy to fix. Well, let me rephrase. Not easy to fix, because there is a lot of work involved in them, but it's easier to find someone who's willing to do it and will probably do a good job. Has anybody contacted Yushin Yi and find out what his wait list is now? I heard it's like 9 months.
It depends on how you handle him. He will do a rush service, like 7 to 10 day service for, I believe it's a 30% surcharge.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, then it probably is 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, someone said I think 9 months is where he's at right
one
now.
One of the myths of, and bless Don Goldberg and Sherry Crowder and Yuxin Yi and all the other well-known Leica repair people. Leicas are not hard to repair if you have the tools to do it.
Right.
And you've done it before. So any repairman that's been around for a while and done, if you've done 10 Leica Barnack cameras, there's nothing going to surprise you when you get into it. So everybody wants to send them to Yuxin Yi or Dag or Sherry, but they don't need to. If you have a local good repairman, you'll get just as good a service at a lower cost, and you'll have the camera back a lot faster.
In terms of Leica repairs, does Leica themselves still repair the old cameras? Because I've heard a few people that take them in and they still get like their M3s done and
only mechanical cameras, Theo. Yes, they still repair mechanical cameras.
I think they also have like a 9 or 10th month waiting list, though. I was in Wetzlar in February, and they wanted, I think it was 9 months then.
Will they still do the upgrades like they used to, like add flash sync, the older models or something?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, it might be something you could ask them about.
Yeah.
But they do also, I think they give you a year's warranty on it too. So that's kind of a cool thing.
Plus, I suspect for collectors that would pay a premium to be able to prove your camera was fixed at the factory would probably increase its value somewhat too. But I wouldn't suggest that be the reason you do it, though.
It really has to be an unusual camera if it was a black paint M2 or M3, then maybe that's what I would do. But, for a regular double or single stroke M3, sending it to the factory and paying $600 plus to get it CLA just doesn't make any sense.
Well, I don't think a black paint M2 or M3 serviced by Wexlar or by any of the top would increase the value at all.
You're probably right, because the people that buy those cameras aren't going to use them anyway.
Yeah.
So what difference does it make?
Well, wait, if we're going to be limited to things that make sense, I probably should just leave.
Wait a minute here. Drink the juice.
Drink the juice.
All right, Larry, tell us what you got that doesn't make any sense.
Our last acquisition that needed serious repair was a Medalist. I sat there with a Medalist in one hand and bottle of lighter fluid in the other, really, really thought about it. I mean, I really thought I'm just gonna soak this camera down and see what happens. But I looked at it, and that medalist is so beautiful that I went on a research project to find someone who could actually do it right. So I guess
one thing you can do on the medalist, it's actually very easy, is if the only thing it needs is to clean the windows. If you look through the viewfinder and the rangefinder and they're cloudy, one really cool thing about the medalist is there's no beam splitter in there. They don't use mirrors; they use prisms. And the great thing about prisms is as long as it hasn't taken physical damage, those prisms are cemented in place. So it's rare to find a medalist where the rangefinder is not calibrated correctly. Usually they're just dirty. There's 4 screws that just hold the top plate on. The only thing you need to keep in mind is you got to make sure that the lens is retracted all the way and do not move it with the top plate off, because that little depth of field scale, the depth of field scale stays with the top plate, but there is just one gear that it just has to mesh correctly. So what you want to do is make sure that the lens is retracted all the way in, remove 2 screws from the front, 2 screws from the back, pull the whole thing up, set it aside, and you have immediate access to all the prisms in the viewfinder glass and just a gentle, some glass cleaner. I've done that on 2 of them, and I was able to get those things perfectly clear. And then
so
you just
Q-tips and alcohol, or
I like using like glass cleaner. When I'm cleaning glass or prisms, mirrors you got to be really careful with. But usually, if it's just straight up glass, I like using Windex, Sparkle. Anything that's actually meant for cleaning glass usually is okay.
So W40.
Come on. The biggest problem you'll find with medalists is in the film transport. That would probably be the hardest thing to fix, and that's something I would not try. The shutters, it is just a leaf shutter, so I guess if you have experience with leaf shutters, it's probably doable by a novice. But if there's something that's wrong with the film transport on those cameras, which is actually probably their weakest link, that I wouldn't even know what to tell you.
This camera started out, the first couple of frames were spaced properly, but they got closer and closer together until the last ones were overlapping. I thought it might be beyond my impact maintenance and lighter fluid procedure.
In your research, have you found anyone? Because I've got a medalist, and I've been looking as well.
I sent it to Dan Daniel.
Oh, I've heard of him. He will convert them to 120 or not, your call.
Yeah,
and he's got a long. I've heard about him and a fellow Zach's camera. He used to have a shop, and now he does it himself.
Yeah, Michael retired. Michael Zach's retired. He's a good friend of mine.
Oh, okay. I thought he was doing a few on the side without the shop.
Who did Alan?
Dan must be busy
because the medalist for somebody. Who was it, Mike? You remember?
Yeah, I know Alan. Alan did. It was someone on the shows.
Yeah.
I know he's done it. He will not do the 120 conversions, though. That is something that I don't recommend unless it's someone like Ken Ruth at Bald Mountain retired like 5-6 years ago. And to my knowledge, no one offers it and does a good job of it.
And plus, now you can get a number of emulsions in a workable 620 roll. So it's expensive, but what isn't? But I think whatever project, they've got about 6 or 7 colors.
Darker project, yes.
You can do that. But honestly, and something I'll say over and over again, to me, there's no reason not to just respool it yourself. It's so easy. You don't even need a dark room. Just go in a bathroom, shut the door, turn the lights off. You need 2 spools. It takes 90 seconds each one.
Got to close your eyes though, Mike.
Close your eyes, and you know what? I do that. I don't know why. It is a psychological thing. I'm standing in the dark, and I have my eyes closed. I don't get it.
Well, I was spooling up a roll of 828 last night and dropped it in the floor. And I got to tell you, I haven't had the film sweats in years, but they came on me because the roll of film was bouncing around the floor somewhere, and I picked it up, and I thought I had loaded it up on the reel, and something didn't feel right, and I realized that I'd loaded the paper backing on the reel instead of the film.
Yeah. So for anybody who doesn't know, 828 is 35 millimeter film, but just without the perforations. Larry, did you find unperforated 35 millimeter somewhere?
Yeah, B&H.
Oh, okay.
B&H had it. So really? Yeah, I bought 2 rolls, and I figured that I'll use that paper for respooling 35 from now on.
What do they sell unperforated 35? What uses are there other than people at Respool or 828?
Instamatics.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah.
The issue with Instamatics, though, is you really do need that index hole.
Yeah.
Many of the cameras, they won't advance properly, but there are some that will. Some of the cheaper ones, you can use your straight 35 millimeter unperforated film, and it'll work okay.
Yeah, and this film had 1 hole, so I assumed that it was probably originally for 126. It was Kentmere. So, but yeah, they have B&H. I just stumbled over classic film reels. You can get 127, 828, of course 620. I'm sorry, I sort of derailed the conversation. I just wanted to let you know.
I did not expect the Medalist to be the first camera that you mentioned here. But we got a lot of people here. Is there anybody here that wants to speak up that's already dove in at an amateur level repairing their own cameras before and wants to share maybe their experience or what they started with?
Maybe something a little newer. I love my 80s, 90s plastic cameras. Big challenge I have, of course, plastic disintegrates. Big fan of the early 90s Nikons. My F801S is sitting here with me, but I've been looking at battery holders. So battery doors, battery holders, and I've got things that have come to dust, and my father's been helping me out. We've been experimenting with 3D printing. I'm curious to know what folks are doing their own printing or looking at printing to replace parts. I'm trying to rebuild a Nikon or come up with a Nikon MS7 AA holder. They're about $100 on eBay. So I'm trying to see if I can put one together this way and then keep these things going. I have one good battery holder and 2 cameras, so that's where I'm at. I have the other usual things, older cameras and stuff like that, but I'd be curious to see if anybody's been in any of that stuff or has magical sources of Nikon parts from that era.
Well, on your battery holder, was it plastic fatigue or was it corrosion that you're getting?
Plastic fatigue. Actually, the metal pieces are all together. I was trying to replace the bottom plate and try to save the top part, but the top part disintegrated, so I'm probably going to go all new plastic and then take the metal parts and try to rebuild it that way.
So the screw is still good, and
everything is.
All you really need is the plastic piece. Well,
it's almost like the plastic I don't know. They left the battery holder sitting on the side. The rest of the camera's fine. It's just the battery holder was bad. So
honestly, I don't see a lot of 8008s with that problem. Though I'm not saying you're not having it, but I don't see a lot of N90s or 8008s because that's the battery that comes completely out. The holder, it's not.
Yeah, it does. It's a screw. There's a screw that they just have a thin plastic plate.
That's where the problem is.
It is. Yeah.
So
And that's the thing. It might be easier for me just to find a few more donor cameras and pick those up. It's a good point.
Yeah, because the cameras are dirt cheap. But if you figure out how to do it, if you can make them, you'd be doing a service to the whole community. If you
the patterns are out there. People have done it. I just need to figure it out. So anyway, work in progress. Lens hoods and things are a little bit easier because I also have like one of the older original autofocus 35 to 105s I like. They only made one hood for it, and I could order a plastic hood from their. Like that camera from that lens from the late 80s from was that Camera Store? Is that the one that's somewhere in Scandinavia? I forget exactly where they are. It would cost me just as much in euros to ship it as it was to buy a piece of plastic that may be no good when it gets here. So we've been experimenting with lens hoods as well with some level of success. So it's kind of fun too.
The one that would be great if somebody could figure out how to make them is the battery door for the Canon AE1s. That's the worst of all.
Yeah,
there was a company that was making them, Paul, but they weren't close to what Canon had initially, and they were $30, and they were extremely brittle plastic.
And they're not easy to put on either because you got a spring in there that there's some disassembly required to get to.
There's a long pin.
Top of the camera,
Right.
Yeah.
Has anybody found, Andrew, like I know you can go to like Thingiverse and there's some other websites you can go to where you could download templates, but has anyone found a good like camera-centric depot of like a bunch of parts for cameras, or is it all just kind of scattered?
I don't know if it's like a centralized thing for parts too much. They are kind of scattered, but there's a Facebook group, 3D printing and analog photography, and it's a fairly active group, and they're doing like lots of really cool stuff on there. Definitely a place to check out, or bring questions, or if you're trying to do that kind of stuff.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to join that because I would be interested in hosting something like that. Like here's like people submit just little pieces like that you do, and even if it's not perfect, there are people who will improve the designs too and come up with new things. So
there's even things like this is a Nikon DK17 clone that's rubberized, like so that softer plastic.
And what's that do?
Doesn't fall out because it's rubber.
I mean, what does that part do? I'm not familiar with
it's an eyepiece.
Oh, an eyepiece. Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah, but there's lots of options. But that Facebook group sounds like a really good idea.
Well, the one that you could someone could make a fortune making are the replacement eyepieces for the FEs, FMs, the 2925s. It's 2925 or 2921, Ray?
2921.
2921. That's the one Theo was looking for. those eyepieces, they're diabolical. I mean, they'll unscrew if you just walk around carrying the camera.
Yeah, I've lost one in Vietnam, and then I lost another one in Thailand, and it's they just fall off, especially in the hot environments where you're sweaty and everything, and it just. I took your advice the last time though, Paul, and put a little bit. Was it acetone? I think
Clear
it was.
nail polish.
Yeah,
just
on
a
there,
little,
just a little drop.
tiny
Yeah,
drop of it,
and it just keeps it on there. But yeah, they're hard to find. Then you have to order them, and then they cost a fair bit. And Nikon has two sizes. One which was for the pro models, and one which is for the consumer models or prosumer models. And it's harder to find, like the ones for the FM2, for instance, than they are the ones for the F3 and F4 and so on.
Since Andrew mentioned battery compartments, 3D printing aside, I think a good home repair is cleaning corrosion. Does anybody want to share? I mean, I've cleaned many cameras, corroded battery compartments off. You get that greenish, blue, sometimes white corrosion from leaky batteries. A lot of the 80s AA and AAA batteries were known for that, but you could certainly see it on any of the old Mercury batteries too. But does anybody have a favorite recipe for how they like to clean corrosion off battery contacts?
Vinegar.
White vinegar?
White vinegar.
I've used that.
Yeah, vinegar is great. If you've got an alkaline battery, then the vinegar is the opposite, and we'll just interact with that and clear that away.
I generally use vinegar and then wipe that off with a little bit of baking soda solution to sort of neutralize the vinegar. Is that a good idea?
Even water will neutralize the vinegar on it, to be honest with you. So.
Water is great. Be sure you flush it. Once you want to get the vinegar off once it takes the corrosion.
The good news and bad news, a lot of the earlier Pentax cameras that the entire battery chamber gets seized to the bottom of the camera. This is very common. Most often I can take a bottom of the camera off, which it holds the battery chamber or the battery cover on and let it sit overnight. I'll make a recommendation that only on chrome versions, I would not do black paint.
It'll eat away the paint?
It eats away the paint, yeah.
Yep, I've done that exact trick on more than just the Spotmatics. There are many cameras that use the button cell batteries on the bottom. If you can't get that, like the coin, door off, usually there's 3 or 4 screws on the bottom plate of an SLR that can painlessly come off. If you do remove the bottom plate of an SLR, in addition to paying attention to the screws, which we'll get to in a minute, but the other thing is the rewind release button a lot of times will just fall off. Make sure you pay attention to that because it's usually not connected to anything. It's usually just sitting there. But if you're afraid and you've never wanted to take apart a camera before, removing the base plate of most SLRs is a relatively painless thing to do. And if the battery compartment is corroded, do what Ray said and just soak it. If it's chrome plated, it'll probably be okay. Probably don't need to do it overnight. A half hour, an hour should be enough, just enough to loosen it to where you can get the cover off and then clean it more directly.
Hey, Mike, I think even before we start opening up cameras is also making sure you have the proper tool.
Yes, I agree. So
everybody says I'll get the eyeglass screwdrivers, and that's absolutely incorrect.
The thing is that Japanese cameras look like they use Phillips screws, but most of the time they use JIS screws or Japan Industrial Standard, and they're slightly different than Phillips head. If you use a Phillips head, it will do a little bit of damage, and you can probably get away with once or twice getting a screw out if it's not stuck too badly. But if you're doing it over and over again, or if it's really badly stuck, a Phillips head screwdriver will strip that screw, and then you're screwed. You'll never get it out. So JIS screwdrivers are easily available on Amazon. There's a company called Vessel, Vessel, that makes some kits that I really like. The nicest thing about them is that you can use a JIS screwdriver safely in a JIS screw or a Phillips head screw. So if you don't know what you're dealing with, just use a JIS screwdriver and you're perfectly safe.
Even the flathead ones through this company are really, really good and can be sharpened.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say is that if you look at a watchmaker, they've got all kinds of different widths and thicknesses of screwdrivers. So you want to be sure that the width and the thickness is fitting the screw that you're going to try and open.
And it goes without saying, the screws on most cameras are made out of brass, and brass is a much softer metal than like a steel screw or galvanized steel like you would see in a car or something. And if that screwdriver slips one time, that screw is probably destroyed. So you got to make sure. That's why the JAS is so important, is you need to make sure you have a tight fit and that it is gripping every piece of the surface area, that little plus sign. Because you slip, your hand slips unscrewing a brass screw, you will gouge it.
What's a source for like replacement screws? given that you might drop one.
Donor cameras.
Donor cameras. You guys can't see it, but I have my big shelf here. On the shelf is 19 inches off the ground, and there's a reason for that, but I won't bore you with the details. But below it, I have 3 large plastic tubs. They are all spare part cameras in various stages of disrepair. And I have found Yashica rangefinders. Yashica seem to be the what is it, type O blood? They're the universal donor. I have been able to salvage a lot of screws and just miscellaneous parts off of like Yashica lynxes and ministers and stuff like that. And I've found uses on other cameras for them.
Now you have to admit it though. They're not actually spare part cameras. They're actually cameras that you reviewed and then you take in the sledgehammer to.
And I smashed them. Yeah. In the early days of my collecting, KEH used to have these ridiculous sales where you could get SLRs and rangefinders for like $10. Like I would just order random cameras just to try them out. Maybe 1 out of 5 would be okay, but I would just keep the spares and they would just go in a box, and I would sometimes salvage parts off of them too. And I still have a bunch of them in Ziploc bags that I don't do it as much as I used to, but spare part cameras do have value, especially if you're trying to get other ones working.
I will always say that if you buy a camera and it's not working, the best thing to do is buy another one that just like it that's not working, because not only is it good for spare parts, it can also be a good practice camera that if you can't find good info on taking it apart online, or you don't want to dive in and get yourself into trouble, buy a second one that's cheap, that's got some other different problem, maybe a worse problem, and you can take that one apart, make all the mistakes, like you're talking about the Medalist, Mike, with knowing how to align that depth of field scale. These are things that if you don't know, you can get yourself into trouble. So if you can find information online, like a YouTube video or somebody's blog post, that's great. But if there's no information, just get another one, tear it apart, make all the mistakes on that one, or even just use it as a reference when you're taking apart the good one, that you get to a part you don't know how it was supposed to go apart or how it's supposed to go back together. Go to your other camera and take a look at how that one is put together and use it as a reference.
And for my next tip, while you're taking it apart, utilize the wonderful technology that is a smartphone and take a crapload of pictures of every piece of the way. Like if you're removing a wind lever off of a camera, usually there's a little screw on top that you need a lens spanner to get off. Sometimes they're held on by friction. There are often wavy washers or seat pins or clips or something, and they're in random orders and they're different in every camera. So when you're taking a camera apart, take a picture, remove a piece, take another picture, remove a piece, take another picture. I promise you that will come in handy when you're putting it back together to see the exact order of parts.
But it's really hard to take that picture, Mike, when you take that piece off and you go to take the picture and the spring is halfway through the air as it's on its way to the carpeted area at the back.
Yeah, I was going to say every single vintage camera is booby trapped with a spring that you will never figure out how it goes back.
That's true.
Just before we get too far away from tools, I was just going to ask a question. Can anyone recommend a good, I think they call them a pin wrench?
A spanner?
It's like I've seen them, they look like a drawing compass. They've got the 2 pins that go.
Yeah, a spanner. I don't have a good recommendation, but I would like to hear one.
The one that Steven's holding up is a good one. You don't buy a cheap one. Don't buy an $18 spanner, because what happens is they do not lock into place.
No, right.
And the minute you try to turn them, the whole thing is just it flexes. So you want to buy one that has the 2 crossbars like the one Steven has, and the ones with the wing nuts on the top are the best. They're going to lock the tightest.
And there's ones that have replaceable tips too, because sometimes you want the pin to go straight. Sometimes you want them flared out. It's nice to have options.
Yep.
So one of the best spanners I've ever purchased were a set made by SK Grimes.
I was just going to say that, Ray. I have the same set.
Phenomenal. They're not small, so they're not for everything. They're primarily for lenses than they are for cameras, but they're a single tang. It's not a dual system. It's a single tang, and they can either go on inversed or outlaid, depending upon the angle. And they are phenomenal. They're strong. They're hard. Mine are 35 years old, and Adam is still making them today. So there's a good plug for a made in the United States. Again, designed more for lenses and larger things than for cameras per se.
Yeah, I have both. He makes one with a flat
and one with a point.
One with a pinpoint.
Yep.
And they are without question the best for lens use.
One company I like is Micro Tools, micro-tools.com. They have a lot of stuff from various companies now. And most often, if you find something on Amazon or eBay that's made in China and is of dubious quality, it's a copy with incorrect instructions stolen from Micro Tools. So that's a good go-to for me.
So if good screwdrivers, JS screwdrivers, quality tips is the first thing you should buy. The second thing you should buy is a good spanner with adjustable tips. It's high quality. But I would argue the third tool you could buy, and this you can get for cheap on Amazon, are these little grippy tool. I'm actually missing my two smallest ones. Yeah, he's got one. So all this is, it looks like kind of like the tip of a cane. They stack in one another. And what these are useful for is removing like the vanity ring on the front of a lens. When you're disassembling a lens, many times there are notches for a spanner. But if there's even a tiny chance you could slip, or you maybe aren't as comfortable with your ability of using a lens spanner, these will work too. You just got to get that right size. And they're double-sided, so you just find the size that matches up the lens you want. I have a Revuenon 50mm 1.4. I'm not going to actually take it apart, but if I wanted to, I would just find the piece that's about the right size, and I would put it on there, and then you just, with even pressure, just rotate it. And that grippiness is usually enough to break free any piece you might want to get off. This is a wonderful tool to have, and there's far less chance of you damaging or scratching something with these. So I wholeheartedly, and I think I bought these for about $20 for the whole set. Looks like yours are a little bit more heavy duty, Stephen.
Yeah, and there are a lot of different sizes, and those just came from AliExpress in China, but they've worked perfectly.
Yeah, I love those.
And in some cases, you can find things where it's supposed to unscrew but won't because it may have been glued at the factory or by a previous repair. And if you know something should unscrew but it's not, one of the things I like doing is dripping a little bit of acetone into the basically nail polish remover, just dripping it into the threads around the edge. You can put it on a Q-tip or something else and just work it in there. And I've had lenses that won't open, and rather than attacking it with a spanner and slipping and scratching things, I'll just go in and put a little of acetone around the edge, wait half an hour, go back and do it again. I'll do that 5, 6, 7, 8 times during a day, letting it soak in. And then by the end of the day, you can go into one of those little rubber tools and easily unscrew it. So knowing what you're trying to do and what obstacles you might face and giving it a bit of patience can often be a bit better than just brute force.
Great tip. Great tip.
In a similar situation, one of the big things that you wind up with is a filter with a dented filter ring, and the filter gets stuck on the lens itself. There are no good ways to get it off, but the first thing to try is the jar opener that you find. There's several ways to do that. A jar opener is a flat piece of rubber that you push down onto the filter and turn, and it applies even pressure throughout the. Yes, Ray is holding up a wrench, like an oil filter wrench with a rubber slip joint pliers with a rubber piece around the grippy edges.
They work out pretty well.
Yep.
A lot of times I'll either try to remove, if it's a spanner, to remove the glass and break it out, and I will squeeze the filter off without trying to unscrew it. I'll physically collapse the filter ring off the lens itself.
I do that more often than I want to.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's scary because you got to break the glass out of the filter.
Correct.
So you just do it over a trash can and tap it gently. Use the JIS hammer to make it as simple as possible, and then use a pair of vice grips just to pull it off. And unless it's a steel ring, it comes off pretty easily.
There's also you can get a pair of rubberized work gloves that I found that I'm first of all, I'm Scottish and Polish, so I'm really stupidly strong. My hand strength is crazy, but these gloves make a huge difference. That I can almost take things off that you really shouldn't have without a tool. But it certainly helps when you're trying to hold that lens and you have vice grips or something that could damage the front optic, which is vicariously close.
It probably makes sense to attempt to crack the filter near the edges rather than the center.
Yeah.
Because most lenses have a convex bump in the middle, so it's less margin of error if you do it in the center.
A lot of times you can pry the edge, Mike. If it doesn't have a spanner inside, you can get up underneath it. But that's when you'd use the Alibaba screwdriver set.
One thing I've done that was really weird but actually worked was because they were dissimilar metals. I think a brass filter and a steel or aluminum lens was taking a small plate, putting water in it, and freezing it in the freezer. And so then I had a flat surface of ice and placing the lens filter down on top of that. And at just the right amount of time, that chilled the filter enough that it would shrink, but not chill the rest of the lens. And it was enough to get it unscrewed.
There you go.
You guys are wizards.
Well, that's kind of what I was hoping we'd get out of this episode is not, we're not going to sit here and walk you through a shutter replacement on an X-Acto, but all these little tips and tricks that could help you overcome one little thing, getting a stuck filter off of a camera, cleaning some battery corrosion.
I would like a service that that answers the question, should I fix it or live with it? Because I had an FA and it has a toggle, a switch on the side of the lens mount that controls whether it's matrix metering or not. And it's just a little metal pressure twist thing. I don't know how to explain it. And it broke. And I just had a little 1.5 millimeter piece of metal sticking out. And there was no way to replace it except for to open up the whole thing. And I bricked a perfectly useful FA because to get there was a nightmare.
Which setting did it end up frozen in? Matrix or regular?
Well, actually, I think I actually could make the adjustment. With it had enough texture to it that I could actually switch it with my thumb. It just was more of a cosmetic thing at that point.
My vote would be leave it. Something like that. Yeah, I would leave it. Specifically, you got to look at the camera too, what it is. I mean, if it's something that you could dramatically increase the value or the ability to use the camera by repairing it, then do that. But if it's just a matter of a cosmetic switch that you could still change the mode if you need to, plus you got to remember too, the Nikon FA is a notoriously difficult camera to fix. Many people who will repair Nikon SLRs won't touch that model. Anytime you look at a camera in the electronic age that did something new, chances are it's difficult to fix. Another great example of that is the Pentax LX, which is a camera that even guys who do Pentax repairs won't even touch that model. And it's not so much that there's something fundamentally wrong with it. It's just that this was cutting edge technology. This was state of the art things people weren't doing. And anytime you're the first to market to do something, whoever is the second to market learned your mistakes and improves upon that. But if you're the first, you have to deal with the things that we're pioneering about those devices. Murphy's Law may work in your favor, Rafael. I'm going to sit here and talk about not fixing the Nikon FA, and I promise you 24 hours after this episode airs, there's going to be some guy going, no, man, Jim Smith in Kentucky will do it. So maybe this will help you. But generally speaking, cameras like that from the early 80s, any of your earlier point-and-shoots, your earlier electronic SLRs, anything that was new, and it's electronic, it's going to be hard to fix. And like you said, if it's just cosmetic and the camera still works, I would just continue to use it. Anthony's not here now, but he's shared a story before where he had a Robot Royal. He wanted to send it to Radu to get it CLA'd. And the camera, or maybe it was his 10X. I think it was his 10X. But it still worked. It was just stiff. And Radu flat out told him, just keep using it. I don't even want to fix it. It's because it still works. It's just tight. It's just sometimes you risk doing more damage. And that's for a professional. If you're thinking of doing a repair yourself, so let's lower the bar a little bit here and go on just a less expensive camera. The measurement for me is, am I okay with throwing this thing away? Am I okay with making it worse to the point where I can't ever use it again? And if I can say yes to that, then I have no problem giving it a shot, right? Because even if my success ratio, let's just say, is 50-50, I might make it work. I might not. I mean, I told you about my 3 plastic tubs. Some of those parts cameras are parts cameras because I made them parts cameras, right? Those are my learners, like Stephen was talking about earlier. So if you're looking to do a repair yourself, the way you answer that question is, am I okay with this camera never working ever again?
I've got a mate who's really good mechanic, does a lot of work on his cars. And the way he always puts it is, does it work now? Well, if it doesn't work now, then you're not making it worse, are you?
Right.
You may as well have a crack.
I agree. And that's the argument, because I've had this argument. I don't really, engage these people. But I've been involved in conversations where people strongly disagreed with some of the information I shared on my website or on posts on social media, just sort of recommending people give it a shot because they feel like you're making it worse. And it's like, if it's already not working, it's already not working. I mean, the worst you could do is just put it back together and it goes on the shelf, right? But think of how many cameras are sitting on shelves that aren't working anyway. So if it's something that's low value, you don't have a lot invested into it, and you could potentially learn from it that might help you fix another camera, I say go for it.
My criteria is, can I find information about the repair? That if there's a factory service manual or a repair guide somebody made, if there's a YouTube video, if that knowledge is out there to go into it. In some cases, it can be knowing what you should lubricate and what you shouldn't lubricate, or that you should remove a certain screw but not take a certain other screw out, or there's going to be ball bearings or springs hiding under something that will pop out. That if that information is out there, it makes it a lot easier to tackle the repair with a lower risk of screwing it up.
Go ahead, one thing I will recommend though is if you're buying, especially if this is a higher priced item and you're buying a camera and you've got someone saying, oh, it's been CLA'd, it's been serviced and it works. Just be a little bit careful sometimes because it may be one of us level type of fix, which is not necessarily a professional. And that's where the lines between who's a knowledgeable professional that can fix cameras and who's actually just someone that sort of says, yeah, I greased up a couple of things, and it's a hack. And he's selling it as a fully serviced camera.
Right.
I had a situation just recently where I bought a second KMZ Practi, which is the first ever camera that has an automatic forward advance on it, motorized forward advance.
Battery powered.
Yeah. So it was the first ever made. Now I already have one which works, which, as far as I can tell, is probably the only one in the world that actually still works.
I think it is.
But I bought a second one because I was hosted by a friend in Thailand recently, and I wanted to take a gift, and I thought this would be a nice little gift to take. And this person claimed that this one worked. So it arrived. Okay, great, fantastic, looks great. They said they fixed that, they had serviced it, and it was all ready and running. And I thought, fantastic. So I stuck some batteries in it, nothing. And I wrote back and said, look, this thing won't even fire up. And he goes, it doesn't take batteries. I've gone, yes, it does. And he goes, can you send me photos of that? So I started sending photos of opening it up and putting batteries in it. And they had no idea. And yet they'd actually claimed the camera had been fully serviced. In the end, they basically said, oh, yeah, have a refund and just keep the camera. So who knows? It might be one of my little pet projects to try and fix it. But it is really important to make sure you know who is actually saying that they've actually serviced the camera.
So I should not buy that Retina Reflex that's been ronsonated?
There was, where I used to live, there was somebody who was repairing AE1s because they often get a really squeaky shutter. They make this almost sound like a dying mouse when they fire. And the proper way to fix it is to take them apart and lubricate certain parts of them. And it turned out there was someone in the area who decided they were going to buy up all the squeaky AE1s and fix them and resell them. And it turned out what they were doing was drilling a hole in the front of the body and spraying WD-40 inside. Oh. And that would work as a lubricant temporarily, but WD-40 displaces water. It is not a lubricant, despite what most people think. And then they plug up the hole with glue and then paint over it. And those cameras would be fine for a few weeks and then start squeaking again. And then after that, they'd start seizing up and having even worse problems because the WD-40 would displace the lubricant that was supposed to be there. And they'd make things far, far worse.
Yeah, they also attract dust. WD-40 is a dust magnet, so you just suck it right in.
That's real quick. The funny thing is like you said, Stephen, WD-40 is not a lubricant. That's not its purpose. It's the only reason it temporarily acts as a lubricant is because it can technically clean away something and create a surface that has less resistance while it's still wet. But as soon as it dries, it's not doing what people think it's doing.
No, I was going to say, talking about AE1s, aside from the battery door problem, the AE1 had two issues that are easy for people to repair. One of them is the shutter squeal, which is solved by going in through the battery compartment. There's an area there you can get into with a pipe cleaner and a solvent, and just go in and just gently run the pipe cleaner into that hole, and that'll 9 times out of 10 take care of the shutter squeal. The other thing that happens to AE1s is the magnets get dirty.
Yep.
And that's also a very simple repair. If you take off the base plate, you'll see on the bottom of the camera are two little magnets, and the magnets they're covered over by a piece of clear plastic. So you have to take that piece of clear plastic off and just clean the magnets, and it'll start firing again just perfectly.
Paul, is also a secondary set of magnets, which is closer to the tripod socket as well.
Right.
We're finding a lot of those magnets, a lot of those devices are failing completely. Not just magnets, but
can they be cleaned or are they done?
Now they're done.
Okay.
Paul, I think you just simplified that other guy's business. If there's a hole in the back where you can just shoot the WD-40, problem solved without the hole drilling. But Stephen, is there a lubricant that you can put in that hole that he drilled and solve the problem?
I wouldn't put lubricant in it wildly if you're going to do it properly. I mean, as Paul said, cleaning it out certainly gets you part of the way there, but really carefully applying lubricant like a white lithium grease or something, there are kind of more gel type things and less spray type things, because in some cases cameras have mechanisms where a very small area needs to be lubricated and you don't want lubricant anywhere else at all. So spraying liquid in is usually a terrible idea.
Correct.
The one thing that is kind of an exception is lighter fluid that you hear a lot of people talking about soaking things in Roncinol, and that actually can work in a lot of cases. It's something that evaporates and it's good at soaking up oil. So if you have an area that you know shouldn't be lubricated and has lubrication on it, a common thing would be blades from an aperture or a in-lens leaf shutter. The best way to do it is to take it apart, remove the blades from the mechanism, soak them in lighter fluid, put it all back together, and especially that allows you to get into the rings around the perimeter of the blades. But in some cases, if you've got a lens where you cannot get into it, or getting into it is more hassle than it's worth, especially with something with a leaf shutter, you can really just take out a front lens element, put some lighter fluid on the blades, wait a little bit, run them a couple times before run, apply more lighter fluid, run it as best as you can, repeat that over and over again. And like others have said, if you're just trying to save a camera that is otherwise useless, sometimes soaking it in lighter fluid is the way to do it.
Is there different types of lighter fluid though? I mean, I've got a kind of Zippo.
Naphtha is what the chemical reaction is, and Roncinol is like the largest in the United States. Zippo it's the same component.
Naphtha is a carcinogen, so if you're going to use naphtha, do it in a well-ventilated room. I actually do use naphtha to clean the blades on things, but you really got to be careful with it because it's pretty hazardous material.
You can buy it in bulk at most hardware stores. This is a quart container. Now, Roncinol bottles are very good because they have that precision tip, which I do really like. So, and this is just like a mineral spirits can. So what I usually like to do is the Roncinol bottles aren't meant to be reloadable because the cap doesn't actually screw off, but with just a small screwdriver, you could pry it off and refill them. So I keep reusing the same Roncinol bottle over and over again, and I fill it up with this. And it is very fumy, so Paul's right. Definitely do this in a well-ventilated area. The one thing that you risk with using Roncinol, lighter fluid, naphtha, whatever, isn't so much that the naphtha doesn't work. It's that it has to get the crap that it's flushing out of there. So that's why a lot of people who object to its use say, well, all you're doing is pushing all that dried crap somewhere else in the camera. And they're not wrong, right? In some ways, some people will say, just put 1 or 2 drops in there. And sometimes that works. But the problem with 1 or 2 drops is all you've done is just move the crud somewhere else. Like Steven commented, if you're doing blades on a leaf shutter, for example, try to get as much of the lens out. So you don't necessarily have to tear the shutter down completely, but get the glass out of there and just douse the crap out of it. Like more is better, right? Like I will use sometimes a quarter of a bottle of Roncinol on a leaf shutter and just soak and soak and soak and keep flushing it and flushing it and flushing it, trying to get as much of whatever the old crud is out of there. And then you got to let it air dry 24 hours easily, well-ventilated area. And once it dries completely, you're probably okay. Sometimes you got to flush it again. I've had to flush Compur and Prontor shutters and the East German Weber shutters. Sometimes the Japanese, I've done Seiko shutters, I've done Copel shutters, and it doesn't always work, but a lot of times it does. And as long as you can flush it sufficiently to where you get whatever was stuck in there and the gunk from before actually out of there, you're probably going to be okay. It is not ideal to get naphtha on glass, but it won't actually hurt it. At least I've never seen it hurt glass before. But you may want to consider if some of it does get on glass, like an inner lens element you can't move, once the shutter is working, a couple dabs of some glass cleaner to kind of clean up any residue that might remain on the glass is probably smart too. But I want to circle back real quick to the Canon AE1. Two things. The squeal, it's not limited to the AE1. The A1 can have the exact same squeal. I think actually all the A series cameras can have it.
That is true. Yeah.
And it's also I know it's a technicality, but it's not actually the shutter that's squealing, it's the mirror dampener. There's a dampener. So you don't actually want a mirror flapping at light speed, shaking the body. Like all SLRs to some degree have dampeners that try to slow down that motion so that it doesn't jar the camera. And it's that dampener that's causing that squeal. And what a lot of people don't understand is on most SLRs, at least SLRs with automatic diaphragms and instant return mirrors, when you press the shutter release on a mechanical SLR, the shutter release isn't actually activating the shutter. It's activating the mirror. It's releasing the mirror, and when it flips up, it hits some kind of switch or a pin, which then fires the shutter. Because, right, like you don't actually want the shutter to open while the mirror is still down. So the act of pressing a shutter release on an SLR causes the mirror to move up. On the Canon A series, there's a dampener that does that squeal, and then when it reaches the upper limit is when it fires a shutter. If that squeal gets bad enough to where the mirror actually slows down to the point where it can't even complete its cycle, the shutter just won't fire at all. And that's where you'll start to see sometimes SLRs where you wind it, hit the button, the mirror either goes slowly or maybe it goes 98% of its travel, but never makes it to that final spot where it actually trips the shutter. So that's why it's so important to what the point we were saying earlier. You don't want to just haphazardly start lubricating things because there's only one specific thing in there that actually needs that lubrication, and it's that dampener.
Can I also say drilling into a camera is not a great idea either in itself. Just the fact of actually drilling in there and there's crud falling in and all sorts of stuff like that as well.
I've seen people who can use like a pipette that know exactly what they're doing. You can get to where the dampener is on an AE1, but you do have to remove the top plate. So drilling, I don't see how drilling would ever work. I mean, you'd literally have to make a hole exactly where the dampener is to even get to it. The proper way to do it would be to completely take the camera apart. The halfway proper way, if someone's done it before and knows what they're doing, they may be able to get to it by removing the top plate and just going down like side parallel to the side of the mirror box and reaching where that dampener is, and maybe they could do it that way. But it is a problem that's very common. It is something you should fix. It's not only is it annoying, but it can actually get to the point where it won't cause the shutter to fire. But at the bare minimum, it's a CLA that a lot of people can still do. Alan Wade did my A1. I had a mint A1 that was beautiful. I don't think it was ever used, but it had the squeal. And I was like, I want this camera to work perfectly. And he got that for me.
Well, that's also tied in, Ray. Do you see many zippy shutters?
Any zippy shutters?
Zippy shutters, the AE series, any of the A series cameras, aside from the shutter squeal, have what we call a zippy shutter. When you advance the film,
yes,
it's you get a really annoying zip sound.
Yep.
And that's usually only really repairable by a CLA.
Yeah, my A1 has that, but the motor drive masks the sound. So that's how I fixed it.
Well, talking about things that we can do, what are some of the things that you should never do? One of the things that I would recommend that no one ever, ever, ever do is try to clean a mirror. I just don't see any, I mean, with anything except air, just a blower brush or possibly a small
Paul, that depends. I think if you can take the focusing screen out, you can clean a mirror pretty easily. It's when you can't take the focusing screen out. Obviously, most screens are etched at the bottom. So if you touch the screen from the bottom, you ruin it. You mar it. So,
well, you can. I'm talking about now the mirror. When you try to clean a mirror is a front surface mirror.
Yes.
So all you can really do is scratch them. If you're trying to clean them with a solvent or any kind of liquid, you can use a hurricane blower or an Arctic butterfly brush, something like that. But if you try to clean it with a cotton swab or anything like that, all you're going to do is damage it.
With ROR solution?
I just have never been able to do it. I mean, I use ROR as the only thing I use.
It's a great cleaner.
ROR, for those of you who don't know what it's residual oil remover.
Yeah.
It has just a little bit of ammonia in it.
Can you explain the difference between a front surface and a rear surface mirror?
Yeah, a front surface mirror is a regular mirror like you'd have in your home. The silver is on the inside underneath the glass. So that's a rear surface mirror. On a camera, because of the focusing precision, the silver has to be on the top of the glass. So when you try to clean it, it's a really soft surface. When you clean a mirror at home, all you're doing is cleaning the glass. When you clean a mirror in a camera, you're actually cleaning the reflective surface.
And that's why in like old TLRs, the viewfinder gets incredibly dim, is because even though someone may have never touched the mirror, that chromium or silver, whatever material is the reflective material, it oxidizes and can actually evaporate or fall off. Tarnishes, yeah.
It tarnishes.
You want to clean a mirror, clean it from the top. I mean, like Ray was saying, if you can take the focusing screen out, on like a Nikon or Hasselblad or anything that has a removable prism, blow it from the top down. Don't just start blowing into the camera chamber, because you're just moving it around. You're moving whatever is in there deeper into the chamber itself. So
I polished mirrors for 5 years. I had a telescope workshop here that I was making optical mirrors, and there is a way of cleaning it, Paul. You have to be very delicate. You have to use distilled water. I mean, if anybody wants to, they can contact me. I can send them the procedure on how to do it. But it's not impossible to do. Yes, a front mirror is coated on the top of the glass, but normally there is a micro coating of silicate that protects it. What happens when it tarnishes is that micro coating deteriorates with time. Believe it or not, some of the mirrors that I also have a buddy over here who coats mirrors himself. I have a telescope mirror that's over 25 years old. It has not tarnished. It is actually a Chinese mirror, and surprisingly enough, it was one of the first generations that telescope company had made. And I clean regularly that particular telescope at least once a year.
I think AJ though, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that telescopes use any semi-reflective mirrors though, do they?
Semi-reflective, no.
Like we're right. So the bigger challenge, you're right. You can clean a mirror. It is possible. You just have to know what you're doing. But there's also degrees of types of mirrors that are in cameras too. Many of the newer metered cameras use a semi-reflective mirror similar to a Pelix, where a portion of the light actually passes through it. You'll actually notice on cameras like the AL1, a lot of the 80s SLRs, you'll see a little grid, which is actually part of the metering circuit, is built into the mirror. And the reflective surface, I don't know the measurement of it, but you're talking like incredibly, incredibly thin. So I would speculate that on many of the later electronic SLRs especially, that reflective coating on a reflex mirror is far more fragile in a camera than probably a telescope
Those
would
in
have.
particular I wouldn't touch, but I have gone through TLRs. I've cleaned TLR and not had any problems.
The other tip I have too, if you're going to clean a mirror, chances are there's black gunk that's on it, which is what you're trying to clean. If that's what you're trying to clean off, that's almost certainly the mirror bumper. Replace that first. So don't go through the effort of cleaning the gunk off, because more is just going to reappear on there. So if you have like an old Nikon, or a Minolta is actually famous for their mirror bumpers just completely disintegrating. You want to remove the bumper first and replace it first, then clean it, because you only want to clean it once.
What material is the bumper? I have a couple cameras.
It's just foam. It's just a foam rubber. It's the same material used for light seals.
Okay.
Yeah.
In a pinch, I have used from Joanne Fabrics, who I know just went out of business, but adhesive-backed black felt will work too. You just got to be careful not to get the fuzz inside the camera. But anything that acts as a bumper will actually work. Because unlike a light sail that actually has to keep light out, the mirror bumper is really just a bumper. It's not protecting light anyway. So anything you could use that will replace that surface and give the mirror something to rest on that won't damage it. Foam by far is the better choice. Get a kit that's made specifically and cut to the right size. But if you're going to make your own, you can get from a hobby store. Black felt will work too.
The other thing that you want to it should go without saying, but people do it anyway. Don't ever spray compressed air onto a mirror.
No, right.
Never. Don't. In fact,
shake
I don't
it first, right, Paul?
I'm sorry.
You got to shake it first.
Shake it up real good before you do it. I keep compressed air in the darkroom to clean negatives, and I'm even nervous about doing that anymore. My camera repair guy had a compressor that was filtered, so he used compressed air to blow things out. But you don't ever want to spray compressed air into anywhere in a camera.
I actually, for compressed air, use a hobby compressor.
Yes, and that works fine because it's just dry. The only problem you can run into is you don't want to have it to be too. You don't want the nozzle to be too small. You don't want to spray a high intensity in there and knock the springs out.
Especially like Mike said, if it's an electronic, if it's a mirror that contains electronics in it.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Because a lot of the more modern cameras do have the circuits are actually on the mirror themselves.
On the mirror themselves, yeah.
You guys remember the old Sony SLT cameras?
Sure.
Yeah, it was a Pelix mirror.
I put my finger through one once.
You didn't realize it was there?
I was trying to lift it up to clean the sensor because I do sensor cleaning at my shop. Luckily, it was my own body.
On the topic of foam, I think that light seal replacement is an at-home repair that I think anybody can do.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was going to get into that too. The kits are by far the best way, but before you get the kits, you got to get the old stuff out. So we will avoid cameras like what Paul were the Ricoh, the 500Gs,
Canon G3QL17. Yeah. the worst camera ever to replace them.
Big black section of foam.
The entire back of the door is felt. So excluding those, like let's talk about like a Minolta SRT 101, something like that. Basically, any SLR or rangefinder, 35 millimeter camera made 63, 64-ish. The Russians went a little bit longer with the felt seals, but most Japanese and German cameras made after that era had light seals. And there's 3 places where you'll find them usually, sometimes 4. Always in that little channel above and below the film gate. When you open the film compartment, there will almost always be a thicker strip along the hinge side. And sometimes you'll find little pieces on the latch side, but you're less likely to see light seals on the latch side because that's usually the side of the camera that the cassette's on. So that the film's already protected from that side, but some people still did it. So you need to remove the old crap first. Cleaning is a pain in the butt. It's not fun to do, but it's a necessary evil. And if you take your time, it can be done in a reasonable amount of time. My best advice is go slow. Stephen mentioned using acetone to break free some screws that should unscrew that you can't. If you're very careful, acetone is something that can help absorb, because even after getting rid of the old foam, the reason the foam fails, I should talk about, foam is a petroleum-based product, and it's essentially disintegrating back into what I like to call a primordial goo. So that foam literally turns almost into tar. It's really sticky, and it'll get on your fingers, and you got to get some like automotive grade cleaners sometimes to get that crap off your skin. Well, it gets everywhere, and that's the risk, especially if you're one of these guys like me who will go to an estate sale or go to a thrift shop and find an old camera. It's always natural. You want to fire the shutter a couple times. Like, well, I'm going to see if this thing works, right? And we all do it, right? But you got to be really, really careful if you're playing around with a camera, even just dry firing it, or you just want to throw that first roll of film in just to see if it works. Sometimes the act of using it, if you haven't replaced the light seals, that crap can get into the shutter. And once that happens, the shutter is destroyed. Like, to get that sticky crap off of the blades or a cloth curtain, it would be really, really difficult to do. So even if you're like, I don't care if this has a couple light leaks, I'm just testing the camera. And that may be true. Or maybe you'll just put some electrical tape across the seams to externally protect it from light leaks. If you haven't gotten that crap out of the film compartment, it can actually get further into the camera as you're testing it. And that's really, really bad. So even if you just want to do a quick test of the camera, that you really should take that thing home, start cleaning it out. I'm sure some of you guys have different suggestions. I use toothpicks. I've heard people say they use bamboo sticks.
Yeah.
You can use a screwdriver, but you're most likely going to scrape the black paint. There you go. AJ is holding up a skewer.
Yeah, or you can buy a really cheap set of dental picks.
Dental picks.
Dental
picks. Just anytime you're using metal on metal, you risk scratching the black paint. If it's inside the door channel, it's probably not a big deal.
Door channel is where you want to use the dental picks.
Once you get as much of that crap off, there's going to be some sticky residue. So a small amount of acetone, nail polish remover, you can try rubbing alcohol, but I've found much better luck with the acetone. Just using Q-tips. Dip it in the Q-tip, rub it. It'll turn black immediately. Just get another one, rub it until it all comes off.
And Bronzanol can also work well for that as well.
Mm-hmm. And you can cut the Q-tip and use just the stem of the Q-tip.
There you go. Yep, that's probably a good one too.
If you just wanted to, a half-assed way to do it is just replace the foam on the door latch. The door latch is actually the most logical, the most common place for a light leak to happen. So you can buy a 5x7 sheet of foam that's adhesive backed on Amazon for less than $10. And a 5x7 sheet will probably do 50 or 60 cameras. You just cut off, measure the length and cut it about 1/4 of an inch and stick it on the back door. And, that's going to solve probably 90% of light leaks. If it's really bad, like on the Canon G3s, you've got to replace the whole thing. That foam is an integral part of the light integrity of the camera. But on most cameras, the one that's most important is on the back door, on the hinge side.
The way you can tell the foam is starting to deteriorate is that the foam should be in the channel on the camera body and should on the back door, it might be on the hinge on the actual door, but otherwise that channel of the body, if you flip open the back door of the camera and you run your finger along the edge of the back door, if your finger comes up with black marks on it from that back door, you know that foam in there is starting to deteriorate and transfer over to the back door, and it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, if you see any residue or any discoloration, because sometimes it'll show up as like a white foam appearance where it's deteriorated. In that case, you really do need to replace it.
I had an Nikon EM that needed a replacement, and I just couldn't get the foam to work, and I ended up using cotton yarn as a.
I do that all the time.
Yeah, cut yarn is fine.
The only issue with yarn is it's usually too thick. You have to. So most yarn you would get at a knitting store is actually smaller pieces twined together. I usually have to pull one of the strings out and make it thinner in diameter, and then it'll fit okay.
Well, there's something called carpet thread also, Mike, that is a thicker thread, and that's another way to do it.
We have the knitting store of all knitting stores in my town, so I just took the camera in there and asked the lady to help me find one to fit in the hole, and she.
If you have different fabrics, definitely get wool. Wool is better than an acrylic yarn, but when you do the yarn, cut it to the right length. So picture an SLR or even a rangefinder. Most of these cameras made after the 60s have an automatic resetting frame counter. And how that works is there's a tiny little pin that's in the door channel on the top. Generally, if you picture where the take-up spool is, it's usually there. So if you grab any SLR you have handy, open up the film compartment, look in the door channel above about the area where the sprocket shaft or the take-up spool is, you'll usually see a little pin. You got to be careful not to cover that up, because then your frame counter won't work properly or it won't reset properly. But when you do have your pieces of yarn cut to the right length, you do not need to glue the entire length of it down. Just tiny little dabs of rubber cement on either side. Get it in the channel, use a screwdriver or your bamboo skewer or the inside of your Q-tip and just gently press it in, and then close the door. You might need, if it's new, you might need to close it a couple times. If you find that closing the door, there's an incredible amount of resistance and it won't latch, whatever, you use too thick of a yarn. So remove it and just find something thinner, or try to separate some of the threads to make it a little bit thinner. But once you get that new yarn in there, assuming you got it in the right spot, put a tiny little dabs of rubber cement on each side, it's not coming out. And if, God forbid, you screwed up and just have to start over again, rubber cement is really easy to clean up. So that's why I like to use it for holding my light seals in place.
But Paul, when you do that, after you put the rubber cement and the yarn or twine or whatever you're putting inside of there, are you closing the back of the camera door while that dries, or are you allowing for it to dry
Let it dry. Yeah, let the gases get out of there. You don't want to trap those in the camera.
The advice for I just did my wood stove. The same thing. You have to close it, but you have to open it up so it won't dry.
Yeah, you use, you the
could
camera
close
to push it in there really good and then open it
right.
up.
Yeah, I mean, you could close it a couple times and make sure it's seated and make sure you can close it. But, do that for 10 seconds, then pop it open, let it sit air dry overnight, and then once the fumes have all evaporated, you're good to go.
Okay.
And then for the door seal, like Paul said, just buy a sheet of it, cut it to about the right length. Honestly, the thickness of it is less of an issue. The only part you need to be careful of is make sure that it's not too long that it interferes with the hinge.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my tip for door seals. All right,
I change the door seal on every camera that I ship, whether it needs it or not. And I send people a message and say, this door is going to close hard for the first 2 weeks because like I shipped an FE yesterday, and the FE has the latch that you have to release to pull up the film rewind crank, and it is a little tough when you put a new seal on there. You got to pull it pretty hard, but you don't want to pull it hard enough that you pull the whole crank out. So
spring opening door, Paul, right? Spring opening door.
Yeah, it's like unexpected rapid disassembly. You don't want it to come apart if you don't have to.
Yeah, I echo what Paul's saying there. Is if you're doing something to the camera, you might as well change the seals over. I recently had an FM2 serviced, and it was without just straight away said, let's do the seals while we're at it, and just to make sure they're all fresh and new and so on. And yeah, they're a bit tough to start to use, but a couple of rolls in and it was fine.
Yeah, it'll compress and the foam will dry up a little bit. It loses its stickiness.
We certainly have more tips, but we do have some people who haven't spoken yet. Is there anybody that has any questions or things that they've been curious about? Maybe cameras that they've had that they wanted to take a look at, or something we've already mentioned?
I have spoken already, but I do have a question that hasn't been addressed yet. When I was doing research on doing camera stuff, a lot of talk about PEC pads. Are they necessary? Are they worth it? What's the deal with PEC pads?
I use PEC pads and Chem wipes both. Chem wipes are great for optics. PEC pads were originally developed to go with a product called PEC 12, which was an emulsion film cleaner. PEC was photographic emulsion cleaner, and it was for cleaning negatives or slides or whatever. And that's what PEC pads came from. But it's a lint-free, non-abrasive pad. Actually, I don't use them much anymore. I use pretty much Chem wipes for everything. What about you, Ray? How do you?
I have 3 packages of PEC pads at my desk right here, unopened, and I go through a lot more Chem wipes. A lot more Chem wipes.
Chem wipes are great. They're cheap. You can buy them on Amazon, a 12-pack for hardly anything.
I use baby wipes, just generic baby wipes. If they're good enough for a baby's butt, they can wipe gunk off of a camera.
Well, I use makeup remover for real crap on a camera, like polishing a leather or a leather cleaner or conditioner. I use makeup removers pads.
Yeah.
My wife always wonders how she goes through so many of them. But, I have a never-ending supply. Let's put it that way. They work quite well too.
Actually, when I was cleaning mirrors, I was using surgical cut.
Yeah. PEC pads are great because they're lint-free. Chem wipes have a ton of lint, but if you're just cleaning a lens, you can use a Chem wipe and blow that lint off. If you're doing something like a camera sensor, in that case, you probably want to use a PEC pad or a brush or something else.
For a camera sensor, I only use Eclipse swabs.
That's a PEC pad, Paul, basically. So
is it really?
Yeah, it's basically a PEC pad wrapped around a swab.
Is it really? Okay, well, I'm almost out of Eclipse sensor swabs, so that's good to know.
We're going to have to get some Camerosity podcast novelty PEC pads with our logo on it.
Is it Chem wipes or Kim? I'm
Kim.
K-I-M. K-I-M. Okay, I kept hearing Chem.
It's
translation
Kimberly
of the
Clark,
accent.
who is an American.
That's that American trash speak, if you would.
Well, Alyssa, Chris Wells, Keir Frei, Miles, you guys haven't spoken yet. Do you have any questions or anything?
Yeah. So you guys were just talking about cleaning leatherette and leather stuff. So I have this 1903 Kodak Pony Primo 6 that I am working on trying to restore. And one of the things when I got it, it was covered in mold on the outside. All the leatherette was moldy. And so I actually used pec pads with a diluted Castile soap and wiped it down. And that actually worked a treat. And then I used a little bit of leather conditioner on it, and it has not grown mold since. So
nice.
That's good.
That's cool. There's a product called Lexol, Lexol.
Yes.
They make it's two. There are two different products. The first is a conditioner. The first one is a cleaner, and the second is a conditioner. And that stuff is fantastic for any kind of leather or vinyl that has stuff on it, things that are growing on it, like the mold.
A good tip, though, before doing that, though, make sure the bellows are actually leather.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. Yeah, you got to be really careful with paper bellows.
Because basically anything after, I was told actually retinas do not have leather bellows. I can't remember which one of you told me, but someone told me after one of these shows. But a lot of the German companies use leather bellows a lot longer than the Americans do. Basically any Kodak made after the 19-teens is not leather. Alyssa, you said 1909, so yeah, you're definitely right there too.
1903 actually on this one.
Okay.
And it did have leather bellows that had completely disintegrated, like just totally fell apart. So I had custom bellows made.
Cool.
And it's like a PVC product, and I used a company called E-Tone, and I had to send them a bunch of measurements from what I could piece together of the old ones and measure the camera. So I still have yet to attach that, but in the meantime, I'm trying to fix the lens element. It's I can't find any information about it, which has made it more difficult. It's like a Bausch and Lomb 5x7 planetograph, and I have no idea how to fix it. The shutter keeps getting stuck, and it really only has two lens elements.
Okay, so that's a double piston shutter.
Double piston shutter, yeah.
Yep, double piston shutter. Who do we know that works on those? John, is it not Gately? Gilchrist.
Yeah, Gilchrist.
Gilchrist, I think, might have bought the Packard. Well, he bought them for the Packard.
He did Packard, yeah.
But I think he'd be one person to look for. But that's called a double piston shutter. There's also a single piston shutter. So if you go on Google and just search for repair double piston shutter, you'll probably find some information on how to get in there.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Ray, I've never had one apart, so I don't know how complicated those are inside.
I'd rather a copal than that.
Yes, I think I would too, honestly.
I think the piston on those is made out of a hard rubber material, because that's how it creates the pressure, and it, like all rubber, it just hardens, you know?
So if you can figure out a way to treat that rubber, and usually something like Vaseline or any kind of, petroleum jelly will help to soften the piston. Just depends on how bad it's cracked.
Yeah.
The rubber.
Alyssa, could you let us admire that beautiful camera one more time?
Yeah, I know the light is not real great, but it's wood and brass.
It's very pretty.
And it's a telephoto. It extends like 20 some inches out. It gets really.
So how big of image does that expose?
This is a 5x7.
5x7, okay. So
Yep.
she's holding up 5x7 wooden. Looks like it's a cherry mahogany wood. Lots of brass. Beautiful bellows. A nice back. She's got a huge ground.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Through the zoom, that looks way bigger than 5x7, but it's kind of hard to tell scale.
5x7. There's like a mask here.
No, I
like
believe you.
someone,
I believe
someone
you.
put in pencil.
If you would have told me that was an 8x10, I'd have believed you.
That'd be a plate camera rather than a film camera.
That's a plate camera.
Beautiful.
It actually came with wooden film holders.
Well, so since we talked about cleaning, my best advice for what should I use to clean my camera, always start with the least damaging product, right? Air. Start with air. If you can't blow it off, try water. Windex is a nice cleaner. It's good for glass, but if you just got some gunk on the back door of an SLR, sometimes a couple squirts of glass cleaner will take off light gunk. Ronsonol, lighter fluid, is good for dissolving sticky tape residue. Sometimes people would stick exposure charts to the back door of their camera, like from the inside of a new film pack. And over time, like that Scotch tape will yellow or it'll peel off, leaving old residue. you can dissolve that with some Ronsonol. Just slowly work so don't immediately jump for the acetone. Like, it shouldn't be the first thing you use. But in your case, Alyssa, you said you had some mold. Just always go, like, in your mind from the most gentle, and then, okay, that didn't do enough. Now I'm going to need to step it up. So always just have that natural progression of least to strongest. That's a good tip there. But like baby wipes work really, really good. And then if you have, again, just thinking like an SLR or any chrome plated camera, sometimes you get crap in the little knurls, the texture on the knobs, or in really, really hard to reach places. I use an old toothbrush, or it could be a new one. Just don't ever use it again for brushing your teeth. But put a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of dish soap, like half of a drop, and just start rubbing it, right? I mean, you obviously don't want to get the soap and the water inside of your camera, but if you're just trying to clean up the, old gunk on the ribs of a lens, or kind of under the wind lever, sometimes it can be difficult to get that stuff out of there. An old toothbrush can do wonders and clean the crevices of cameras to kind of make them look nicer too.
One best things of advice is, as you move up the scale of things, when you get to the point where you need to put it in the dishwasher, pull out the batteries before you put it in there.
Yes. And make sure you go on a gentle rinse in the dishwasher. You don't want the dishwasher to be on too high.
Right. Well, our friend Tim Chapman was just posted something on Facebook a couple of days ago about a lot of the modern lenses have rubber focusing grips on them. And the rubber on those grips, they
oxidize.
They oxidize. That's the word I'm trying to remember. They oxidize and turn gray, and it actually looks like dirt. I actually got a negative feedback from a buyer who said I sent him a dirty lens. And what I did was I didn't clean the lens before I shipped it, and now I clean them. What Tim uses is Dawn Platinum dish soap, just a little bit of it, and working it into all the ribs or the checks or whatever it has on them. I'm lazy. I use an electric toothbrush, and it works a lot faster. And you use only a little bit.
Paul, another kind of unique material I use is made by Fender. It's called Fret Fast. And it's a lemon oil. Not only on rubber, but also on the leatherette on certain cameras that become a little bit dull over ages. It puts a nice shine, and I swear I put on 2 parts and I remove 3 parts. When I go to, you have to work it on and then work it off.
Well, you see Armor All. Everybody thinks they can use Armor All.
No, not at all.
Armor All is too slick. It's got too much. It's just not the best product for that. There's a lot of rubber protectants that work better.
In some cases, you actually want to be adding oil to something like that rather than cleaning it off with dish soap. That if you have a lens that you notice the parts of it that you're contacting or the part of a camera grip that you're touching is okay, and it's just the rest of it that's yellowing, it's probably actually the oils from your hands that are getting rid of that whiteness. And that's a good indication that what you actually need to treat that rubber or leatherette surface is you need to add oil to it rather than removing it with a surfactant.
And what do you do with those rubber rings are loose?
You boil them.
Yes.
So it's actually one of my major pet peeves is I've seen so many people take a rubber focusing ring that's too large and they start slicing pieces out of it and then trying to make it smaller to glue it back down. But rubber actually is one of those things that will shrink when it's heated. So you can use a hairdryer or a heat gun on a very low setting. You can put it in an oven, like a little toaster oven or your actual oven. But the thing that I love for doing it is putting a focusing ring, remove it from the lens, putting the focusing ring in boiling water.
After it comes out of the dishwasher, you then put it in a pot of boiling water.
Yeah, that would work. Because the really neat thing is that boiling water can never reach the temperature of melting rubber. So you never have to worry that it's going to be too hot. Physics just work wonders in that way. And a few minutes in a pot of boiling water will cause it to shrink down. And that might be enough to get it to, it definitely almost always gets to the right size. And it might be enough then just stretching it over the lens is enough of a hold. If you need a little bit more of a grip to it, you can do some very thin double-sided transfer tape or some contact cement. But
would a hairdryer be hot enough to do that?
The hairdryer would definitely be hot enough. I would take it off because the heat, you can be migrating some of the lubricants inside the lens.
Okay, all right.
And in some cases, you can definitely get it to a point with a heat gun where it's too hot. But if you're careful and you go at it a little bit at a time, try it here and there, testing it on the lens. It works wonders, and it's better than mutilating permanently with a knife.
How about the sticky rubber?
Alcohol. You can rub it. You can rub it clean, but if it's painted, like all the earlier Nikon N90s, on the F100s, the back doors had diagrams of paint. It'll come off with rubbing alcohol and a lot of elbow grease, and the stickiness goes away. I'm not sure if it's worth your time to do that.
Sorry, I was just going to say I have an N80 that came to me very, very sticky, and I have now cleaned it twice with rubbing alcohol, and it seems to keep reoccurring.
It always comes back.
Which is too bad. It's a nice camera.
I've heard baking soda also.
Talcum powder.
A paste of baking soda and rub it, but I don't think anything really is a long-term solution to it.
Because it's important to know, though, too, that that's not dirty. When you're touching a rubber back that's sticky, it's not because someone spilt Kool-Aid on it and it dried. It's actually breaking down. So, Alyssa, I've had your experience where I've cleaned it not even twice, like 8 times, and it always comes back. Ray mentioned the N90 or the F90. That camera is also notorious for a sticky back, but the rubberized coating is so thin that you end up just rubbing it away completely to where you're down to bare plastic, and then it's not sticky. It just looks weird.
Maybe WD-40 is the answer to that.
WD-40 and a dishwasher, yes.
I actually have a N80. I have 6 of them actually because I love that camera. But one of them I did do the car wrap, the vinyl wrap over the sticky part, and it works great.
I have a Minolta 650 SI, which is a wonderful camera. Love it very, very much. But that's from that era of Minolta cameras where the rubber grip around the hand grip literally just cracks and disappears. So rather than fix it, what I ended up doing is I just removed it all, like just got rid of all of it. And I got a product on Amazon called Sugru, Sugru, which is they call it a moldable rubber. It comes in these little packets, and it's like clay. And I needed like 3 or 4 packets because they're really, really tiny. And you basically just mold it to the whatever grip you want. And you can use your thumb with a tiny bit of water to kind of smoothen it. And I basically made my own grip for the camera. And then you let it cure overnight, and you've basically made your own grip. And it's got that perfect balance of tactile grippiness, but a pleasant hold, and that's an option too.
Sugru is great for making film, for making shutter release buttons. If you don't, you can make it for anything because like you say, it's moldable and formable.
Mm-hmm. And it dries solid.
Yes.
Yeah, it dries. It dries hard, but
it actually cures with air.
One fun thing you can do with Sugru is actually add a pattern or texture to it that you can use something like a curved dental pick and just make a bunch of crescent-shaped impressions in it to try and get that kind of fake leatherette from the 70s look to it. Or another thing I've seen people do is window screen material, and that has a very small crosshatch. They'll take a section of it, and when it's molded to the shape they want, just wrap the window screen tightly around it and make the impression of those crosshatches in it to give it a little bit more of a nicer looking surface and a bit more grip to it.
I was just wondering, is there a way to know, based on a camera's behavior, whether it just needs a CLA or it needs something else like a spring? What I'm talking about is shutter speeds. Like if you have a camera that has some accurate shutter speeds and some that are off, is there a way to know if it's fixable, and if it's just a CLA or if it's going to need something?
Usually the shutter speeds are right, either the top or the bottom.
Right.
It's unusual to have a camera where the shutter is bad, both top and bottom. So that's usually just a matter of cleaning it.
That's why I like, when I test cameras for my reviews, I like 100 speed film or 160, 125, because I'll do like Sunny 16 because the shutter speed's around 1/100th of a second. Usually 160, 1/100th, 1/125th, whatever. Those almost always work fine. I've had many, many cameras where the top speed didn't work at all, the lower speed didn't work at all, but the ones in the middle. So like what Paul's saying is they will start to fail at the extreme ends. Sometimes, especially on your older mechanical leaf shutter cameras, there's a slow speed governor, which doesn't kick in until below 1/25th of a second. Many times the governor is sticky, but the shutter is not. So every speed above 125th is fine. But when you get to the slow speeds, they either don't work at all or they're incredibly slow. Like half a second will be like 4 seconds. In that case, that's the governor that's slow. It still needs a service. If you could just live without the slow speeds, generally you can keep that thing going at the fast speeds fine. To answer your question, when you start to notice, if it's a focal plane shutter, if you start to notice, they call it capping, where one part of your image is dark, but the other part is exposed properly, that means the curtains aren't traveling at the correct speed or there's a delay somewhere. And that's your first sign that the shutter is failing. And then, of course, if they have cloth curtains, you got to pay attention to pinholes. Leicas are not immune. Barnack Leicas, if you open it up, because you can't really see the back of a screw mount Leica. But if you take the lens off and you look at the inside of the curtains, if you see a bunch of vertical cracks, it's just dry rotted and you need to replace the cloth curtains.
And another thing that I would strongly suggest that no one ever do on an old camera is try to use a self-timer.
Yes, don't do it at all unless you're willing to break it. On occasion, I've accidentally triggered self-timers, and if it starts going, you can hear that tick, 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 and it'll go tick, 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 tick. Sometimes, if you're real gentle, you can kind of help it along by gently pressing the lever to help move it along. And once it gets to the part where it's not engaged anymore, just make a mental note never to touch it. But yes, do not touch self-timers, especially on the German cameras where you'll see MXV, the letter V on the side of a German shutter. The V is the self-timer. John Michael Mendizza, do you know what the V actually stands for?
I think it stands for a very good chance of breaking the bloody camera, because I've got an IcoFlex where I swear they put it in the most stupidest place. I mean, the IcoFlex scares the crap out of me every time I use it anyway, because you've got to do everything in a very known sequence that if you get anything wrong, you just jam the whole camera up. And they've got that switch in the most ludicrous place where you constantly just sort of flick it, and then you shoot something, you go, oh no, I've done something, I've stuffed it up. And then you start playing around with it, and there's so many rolls of film that I've destroyed just trying to figure out what to do there.
That stupid self-timer.
Maybe that's what happened to my Cantina.
Verzögerung.
Say that again, John Michael.
Verzögerung.
Okay, there you go.
I'm probably murdering it, but it's the delay.
You're doing better than I could. So that Verzögerung means don't touch this. Real quick, I want to go back to the light seals because I forgot my best tip. When you're cleaning out old light material, scraping out the old crap, you got to cover up the film gate too. I'll use masking tape and just take a thin layer of it. Painter's tape will work okay too. And you want to just gently tape over the film gate, because while you're cleaning, you don't want that crap to fall in there and touch the shutters too. Just be careful when you're putting your tape on there not to actually allow the sticky part of the tape to touch the shutter. You definitely want to do something to cover up the film gate so while you're cleaning it, stuff doesn't get in there.
You can just get out a little piece of cardboard and then tape over.
Tape over it, perfect.
Just to be safe, so you can't accidentally
poke. Hey, Wayne, I've never noticed, I'm sorry, this is totally off topic, but do you have a space shuttle behind you?
And a Saturn V, yes.
Saturn V, very cool. I will have to ask you more about that another time. We are getting down to almost 2 hours. This time has flown by. I can't believe all the great topics we've been able to cover. You guys have asked some great questions, but I wanted to have just a little bit of time to talk about what should you do to help preserve these cameras so that they don't need service, or if maybe you have a camera like Rafael was saying, where maybe the fast speeds aren't working, what can you do to ensure that the camera will at least keep working as long as possible to avoid needing a CLA?
Use them regularly.
Shutter uncocked.
I like Wayne's first. Razor's is good too, but Wayne, use it. Right.
Exercise the shutters.
That's why we talk on this show many times when you're looking at a camera and you get one mint, new in box, brand new, right? This camera is cosmetically perfect. It's going to have a much higher chance of not working than the brassed up, worn out, paint rubbed off the body Road Warrior that's been used thousands of times will probably work perfectly. So I definitely agree. Using the cameras for their intended purpose helps tremendously.
Take out the batteries.
Take out the batteries. Yes, absolutely. And that I am guilty of that too, because I can't tell you how many times, what is it, the CR123, some of the lithium batteries, where like I only have a couple of them, and then I get another camera that needs one, and I have a battery drawer in my back room, and I go in there, and it's like, shit, that battery is missing. That means it's in some other camera. So then I have to go through my shelf looking at the cameras that also use that battery because I forgot to take it out. What about humidity, Paul? That's something that you've talked about before, right?
Yeah, and it is a problem for me in Southwest Ohio because this is in the summertime. It's very humid here. I store all my cameras on wire shelves that are vented. I don't keep them anything in a solid surface shelf. I like to have air circulating around them. And my basement actually in the winter and the summertime, it stays around 30 to 35% humidity, which is fine. Like Theo, what's your humidity like there in the winter for you?
Oh, in the winter, it goes skyrocketing when we get rain, and it never gets cold. Never really gets that cold here, so it's high. And if I don't have climate control in the house or you probably can't see it, a dehumidifier going, it's a problem. So I try and keep this room where I store my cameras at about 45% relative humidity, and that's the way I get around any sort of humidity issues. But I also put those silica gel ones that turn into water after a while on every shelf as well, and every few months go through and replace those, and they draw out the moisture quite a bit as well.
Paul, isn't there something you buy that comes in like a jar that's like a silica gel?
Red Away comes in a tub.
Yeah, similar thing here.
It's a desiccant. There you go, damp red. Damp red.
Red.
That's the name I'm trying to think of. Damp red is a desiccant. That works real well. I've got that all over the house.
If you get the stuff that has an indicator so that you can see when it is saturated with moisture and dry it out or replace it, because so many people will just reuse a silica gel packet in paper that you can't monitor, something that was shipped to them in an item they received. Once those get fully saturated with moisture, they start giving off humidity and will actually make things worse rather than better. So you do have to monitor your silica gel and change it regularly.
Well, damp red comes in, I think, what is that, Larry, is that a 1 pound tub or something? I mean, that's a lot of silica.
Yeah, this one is 10.5 ounces. They're big. They come bigger.
Yes.
Home Depot.
So is that good for like a whole room, or would you put multiples of those on a shelf?
I mean, this takes care of this room. The room I'm in is sort of in a basement, so it needs a little extra help from the air conditioning. Yeah. So it seems to.
Mike, that would work well for your size room.
Yeah.
One of those would be great in your room.
Because this room is 10.5 by 13. So it's like a small bedroom. All right. I'll have to do that. Because I haven't had issues with mold, but I've also only been here for a short while too. But I know people who live in tropical areas, that's a much bigger deal for them. Hong Kong, Vietnam, probably the Philippines, anywhere humid. Like even Anthony probably has to deal with a little bit more than even we do here.
Keir, who's on here at the moment, is up in Queensland, so he'd be dealing with a fair bit of humidity as well.
Here in Tennessee, we're officially a rainforest, so it's a temperate rainforest. 99% humidity from pretty much May to Christmas.
So using the cameras, make sure they're cycled through, making sure you reduce humidity, taking the batteries out are all great tips too. My favorite tip, and this just happens naturally, but taking them out of the leather cases. Leather ever-ready cases, I think, is like the bane of every camera collector's existence, because on one hand, you might get that beautiful Nikon rangefinder with that original leather case that has Nikon embossed into the front of it. There's actually many companies that made beautiful ever-ready cases, but one, it sucks to display your camera. You really can't display it in the case. But two, leather just absorbs moisture. And if you find a camera on eBay, this camera was my uncle's or my grandpa's. It was in a closet for the past 40, 50 years. If it's been in that leather case that entire time, the chances that it stinks, reeks, has mold possibly in it is significantly higher than if that camera was not stored in an ever-ready bag. So don't keep them in those cases. Let them get some air. Like Paul said, having them on a shelf that promotes air circulation. Mine are sitting on wood which I needed simply because of the massive amount of cameras I have. I think anything less would collapse. But, that is something that is of concern to me too. Thankfully, the room that I'm in never gets humidity above 50 to 55%. That's the highest I ever see down here.
The other worst place to store cameras is in camera bags, like shoulder bags and backpacks, especially the more modern ones. The foam padding that they use just soaks up humidity and will put that all into all your cameras. And the other thing is that they're dark. The two conditions that fungus needs to grow is humidity and darkness. So a dark, sealed up camera bag trapping moisture is the worst environment for them. So get them out onto shelves and take off lens caps. If you've got a lens mounted to a camera, and so it's not going to be sitting facing up collecting dust on the element, take those lens caps off, because then light will be getting in through the lens. It will be hitting the mirror. It will be passing through the eyepiece of the SLRs or of rangefinders, and that will keep everything fungus free.
And if you do have to store things in a dark area or in storage, one of the things I do is I put them in Ziploc bags and throw in some of those moisture collectors, because once they're closed, there's only so much moisture they're going to collect, so they're not going to collect too much and then keep going. But you need to make sure it's sealed. But I would still check them every so often. I wouldn't necessarily just put something there for 20 years and then come back to it. I'd have to question why you've got it if you're going to put it away for 20 years, though.
When Rudy and I sent the cameras to Paul, do you remember that case that had 3 Nikon F3s in it?
Jeez.
They were fused to the foam deteriorated in the box. Like the entire body was just covered, and these beautiful F3s were like stuck inside the case. There was so much crap on them.
I got an F3 that was in a Halliburton case. It was just a lump of foam when I got it. It's the foam attacks some of the paint, so you can still feel the corrosion.
Paul didn't talk to me for like 2 weeks after he saw that.
I got a Hasselblad kit from that deal in Galveston, Texas. When it got here, it had 2 cameras and 4 lenses and a fiber belt case. That the fiber belt, the foam had basically turned to gel. And the only thing that saved it is that every piece of equipment in that case was in 2 plastic bags. So I scraped them off enough to get the cameras and lenses out of the bags, and then I threw the cases away.
Do you guys keep the old cases, the ever ready cases, or just get rid of them? Is there any value to hanging on to them?
No, unless I like a case, I throw them away.
I'll keep some of the especially, like I have my Zeiss Icon contacts cases, like a Nikon rangefinder, and they have to be in good shape too. I mean, if they're completely rotted, torn, then they're garbage. If they're in nice shape and it's for a camera that has some value that maybe one day I may want to sell and still have the original case too, I will keep it. But I would say 90% of the cameras I've had, I hate the idea of separating a camera from a piece that it was originally included with, but it is what it is. I don't have the room. I was at Vlad Kern from USSR Photos house, and at one point in time he was keeping all of his cases in his garage, and he has a fairly large house. I walked in his garage and there was an entire wall filled with like Tupperware boxes, and he's like, "Mike, those are all cases." And to store them it's a nightmare. And then even if you do store them and you need that one for that one Fotelander VSL2, like how are you going to find it? So
is there anything you can treat it with to sort of seal the inside
of the cases?
Yeah,
lighter fluid.
So.
And a match.
You could vacuum. You could use a vacuum cleaner to sort of pull out all the nasty stuff that's loose in it, but it isn't, it really isn't worth it. Unless you want to use an ever-ready case, nobody's going to really care.
Well, and I wouldn't either, because while the ever-ready cases, for many cameras, especially ones that don't have strap lugs, that was the only way to have a strap. But the problem is that the leather may look nice, but it's probably deteriorated. I wouldn't want to be carrying a valuable camera around my neck, walking around using a 75-year-old leather strap and having it break and fall to the ground. So I wouldn't even use them for their intended purpose. They really just serve no purpose anymore, unfortunately. One never ready case, it's pretty cool, that's worth keeping. They made one for the Fotelander Vitessa, where when you opened it up, the inside of the case was actually a flash holder.
I have one of those.
That would be an example of a case I would keep because it's cool, but that's pretty uncommon. Or they did make some Leica cases where the case is made for having the reflex prism on it, or sometimes you'll see cases that have a longer snout for using with a telephoto lens. Those may have appeal to collectors because they're different. But again, I'm still not going to display or store the camera in them.
Rafael is pulling out some cases, I think.
Yep.
What has he got? Something cool?
Oh, no. He's got cases.
I just was wondering, if there was something you could spray on this, like silicone or something like that would seal it.
I would throw that away.
Yeah, I would. If you want to use it, use a vacuum of some sort on a little handheld vacuum, just to pull all the spore and all the crap out of it.
I mean, hairspray may help keep the fibers together if you want it. I mean, I wouldn't do that, but it might work.
Sell them on eBay as tiny purses.
Tiny purses.
I bet somebody will buy that.
One time, Johnny Sisson sent me a box of cameras, and he used Everready cases as packing material. He sent me this huge box, and he had a whole bunch of Exacta messed up cases that he's like, I just shoved them in there to take up space. So maybe that would be another purpose for him.
I've got one I can keep. This is back to the Zeiss Icon Besomatic. It's got a plastic liner, so maybe I'll back to where we started from. I'll 3D print a version of this and pop this out and put a plastic.
Well, and Raphael's holding up a case, and in the bottom it has the actual mounts to hold the lenses in place. So something like that's practical. Plus, it's plastic, so that helps too. That I would keep. Like I said, there are exceptions, but 95% of the cases made over the years are just throw them away.
On the cases, because like you said, I keep pretty much all my cameras outside the cases, but I've got this Zenit EM that has the selenium meter, so I keep it in the case to keep it dark. Mm-hmm. Is there any suggestion what I could do to cover that selenium meter? Because I don't really want to put tape on it.
I use duct tape over the selenium meter because it comes off pretty cleanly. And it blocks the light going onto the selenium meter. And if you actually put it on and rub your finger over it, it'll actually make the little groove shapes as well. So the camera still looks nice on your shelf, if you cut it nicely around the corner. And that works really well for me. And I have the same issue. It's always light in here, so I don't really want the selenium meters going dead.
Theo, this might be a regional thing. Are you saying you're using duct tape?
Yes.
We call it
hope that's gaffer tape.
Gaffer tape has no residue.
Okay. Because what we call in the United States duct tape, I definitely would not put on a camera. So I think that's a regional thing. I wanted to clarify.
Oh, okay.
Black gaffer tape rather than the silver duct tape.
There you go. Yes. Yeah. I don't know what the rest of the world calls it, but what we call duct tape in the United States, you do not want to put on a camera.
Nope.
So
no.
I wasn't criticizing you, Theo. I just had a feeling the term you were using isn't what we use. All right. Well, it's 9:00 here right now. This has been a fantastic episode. You guys have been awesome. I love the turnout. We've had some great people come in here too. I wanted to kind of wrap this up though, so we could kind of let people get back to their normal stuff. John, I appreciate you coming. I know it's the middle of the night for you. There's a bunch of guys on the Discord server that keep wanting to come, but unfortunately, in Europe, the time's not ideal. We'll do another European-friendly time zone eventually here too. A little bit of maintenance. We just wanted to point people out in case they didn't notice. A lot of times you guys can't remember what the join link is to get into these shows. We do use the same link over and over and over again, but the one that we had been using was not easy to remember. Paul decided to spring for the camerositypodcast.com domain name, so I created a link that's way easier to remember. So for all future episodes of the show, if you're trying to remember how to get into it through Zoom, it's join, join.camerositypodcast.com. So that's something you could bookmark, save, even if it should be easy to remember, join.camerositypodcast.com. That should automatically redirect you to the Zoom link. I used it today and it worked fine for me. So hopefully that'll kind of help you guys remember for future episodes. But if you have the old link bookmarked, it'll still work fine. I don't change the code for Zoom. It's the same one over and over again all the time. As promised, so this is episode 89. The next episode is 90. So that means we're going to be getting out our flannel shirts and our Nirvana records, and we will be doing cameras of the 90s. And if you think that the 90s had some, unmemorable cameras, I'm really excited to talk about a few of my favorites. We already mentioned the Nikon N90 a little earlier. The N80 came out of that era too. Rafael said he had 6 of them. Alyssa's a fan of it. I know, Steven, you're a huge fan of the N80, as am I.
Mamiya
The
7.
Mamiya 7, finally, yes. Theo's all-time favorite camera will be discussed next week. Hopefully we'll have some fun with that too. We did briefly mention the still video cameras in our 80s episode, but with the 90s, we can officially get into things like the Nikon D1 and some of the very early digital cameras too that I think are a lot of fun to use too. So episode 90 of the Camerosity podcast will be recorded on Monday, March 24th at the usual time. Unfortunately, that will not be a European time zone friendly episode. But after that, we are still looking to put together a large format episode. We have some other ideas for some other shows that we want to discuss with you guys too. I have some really cool, fun ones that I think that we can do throughout the course of the summer. Does anybody have any last minute questions or comments before we go?
Actually, there is one
Cincinnati camera show on the 22nd and Cleveland on the 23rd.
Someone was saying
something
something
else. Be square. We got Ray Nason is going to be joining us, and we got Anthony is coming up. Mike is coming down. And it's very, very possible that Anthony will have some T-shirts, some Camerosity podcast T-shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
So there you
One
go.
thing that I wanted to keep on saying was that, Mike, I know you love your glass cleaner and your Windex there, but one thing I would be careful about is ammonia. That glass cleaner having ammonia in it can do terrible things to plastic and even to some types of glass that the coatings on it can be damaged, or if you've got a yellow or a blue rangefinder patch or window that they're sort of coloring that for color contrast, the ammonia in some cases can do terrible things to that. So I would avoid that. Use ammonia-free glass cleaner, or even just ethanol, methanol. Those are what most of your commercial lens cleaning fluids actually are. But one thing that ammonia-based cleaners are great for is the leatherette from the 1970s and 80s cameras. Windex with ammonia does a fantastic job of cleaning up leatherette on camera bodies.
Good tip. Good to know. Thank you guys for calling. Again, thanks for the great turnout. I'm super happy to talk to you guys. Everybody, thank you. As always, the topics and discussions on the Camerosity podcast are influenced, demanded, conditioned, whatever you want to say it, by you guys. We appreciate every piece of feedback that we get. Don't feel like if you have a suggestion for a future episode that the only way to contact us is through the Discord or through Facebook. Come on the show. Influence the discussion. We do get off topic many times. So we're always happy to talk to new callers. Don't feel like you have to have the level of knowledge or nerdiness that we have. We love people who are just new to the hobby or getting started. And the more questions you ask, the more we'll have things to talk about. But thank you guys for coming. You guys have a great rest of your night and week and whatever. And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Good night.
Thanks.
Not all.
Bye now. Make sure we have a disclaimer about people putting their cameras in the dishwasher.
Theo says,
put your cameras in the dishwasher.